Okay, I would like to share how I process film, black and white specifically, in Ch01. Obviously, if you use Lightroom, you're going to use Negative Lab Pro, so this doesn't apply to you, and lucky you, you like Lightroom and get to use Negative Lab Pro. I used Lightroom for years. I prefer Ch01, even though it doesn't let me do use Negative Lab Pro. I still prefer Ch01. And thankfully, Ch01 has introduced this Convert Negative tool. And prior to this, we were having to do it by hand, which wasn't the end of the world, but this gets us a lot closer faster. And so I would like to share my process of making use of the new fancy tools that Ch01 has provided us for developing film. And I'm going to start with black and white. We can do color later, but black and white for now. Now, this is T-Max, and it was shot on a Pentax 6.7, though that doesn't matter. And this is using my style that I created. I'll show you how I created it so you can have your own if you like, or you can follow my method to create yours to your taste. All right, so let's start from the beginning. We'll create a new variant. And let me first talk about the process that I scanned, because it matters. I followed Ch01's procedure for scanning with the intent of using Convert Negative, which is, the short version is, white balance on the emulsion, and then, turn on the exposure warning and capture the image as bright as you can, just short of clipping the highlights. That's the short version. You can go to their website for the finer details, but that's the short version. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, I use Ch01's film negative mode, which is the meat and potatoes of the Convert Negative. So we start with that. Now, obviously, it's dark. We'll talk about why in a minute. And my histogram looks ugly because, well, one, it's dark. Two, it's got, color, which we'll clean up. And also, there's noise from the emulsion, the film holder. So I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but it's always best to start by eliminating everything but the image, because the histogram is showing you what's in your cropped frame, right? So now the histogram is clean and showing us only the part that we care about. After we're done, we can go back and re-include the film borders and such if you like, which I do, but you do what you like. So, but while processing, we only want the image. All right. So, like we said, the scanning process is such that you get the image to be as bright as you can without clipping. So when we invert it using film negative, if we didn't use film negative, of course you can flip it this way, right? But film negative applies a special curve that we want to borrow. So, and it flips it for us. And it's nice because rather than having everything backwards, rather than having everything backwards, right? This is making it darker. What? That's how it used to be. But now, before we had film negative, now we get this fancy schmancy film negative that, hey, look, it's going the right direction now. Whee! All right, anyway. So, all right. So it's inverted. We've cleaned up our histogram, but obviously it's way too dark. Why is it way too dark? Well, it's because when we scanned it, the latitude of the film of this of the sensor, I use the Nikon Z7. So this will be different for you. You can't use my literal data points because you're going to be using a different scanning light. I use the CS light, the Cinestill CS light. I use a Nikon Z7, and those variables will definitely change white balance and brightness and how, the digital sensor latitude, all those things. So follow my procedure if you like, but don't use the exact data points. Okay, so having said that, the Z7 has a lot of latitude, and so it captured a lot of latitude. And so not only that, we compressed it down because we shot the image as bright as we could. So bright getting inverted becomes dark. So everything is compressed down. Now that's not a problem. We didn't lose latitude. We just need to remap the range, right? Because Capture One gives us a really broad histogram. So, if we remap the range, oh look, it looks a lot better already, right? But don't just go and do that. I hope you didn't just click goodbye, because that's not the end. You do that and you have no wiggle room whatsoever, because as you shift slightly, everything falls off the histogram. So don't do that. All right, we're not done, but that's a big part of it. So the point is, everything is in the dark range, and the lighter half of the histogram is just completely unused. So we've biased everything into the darker half of the histogram. So that's why it's dark and muddy. I know you know this. Forgive me. I'm not trying to educate anyone here. Don't let me be insulting. I'm just trying to provide the foundation for the changes that I made. Okay. So, all right. Where were we? Okay. So we're going to play with the levels and we're going to play with the curve. But before we jump into that, we need a little more wiggle room, because everything has been compressed down to the shadows. We have only this little bit of space in the shadow side, but we have so much space on the highlight side. So we move. This is just data. Don't move the exposure to taste. We're not moving it to where we like. We're moving it to get the data into a more centered place so that we have more room to play with. But at the same time, we don't want to go. You might say, oh, why not just move it into the center? Look, now we have the most room to play with on both sides. True, but if you're like me and you want more latitude, more runway for your fall off on the highlight side, then you want to still bias them towards the dark side, Darth Vader, and join me and together we can rule the okay. So we still want them to be on the darker side of the histogram, because we want to have that fall off, more elongated on the bright side. But how do we do that if it's all on the dark side? No. Right. Okay. So one stop brighter gets us enough wiggle room to play with. Look, we have that's plenty. Now let's go and find where the healthy black point is, something like that. And let's find out where the healthy light point is. White point, whatever. Okay. Something like that. And I'm gauging it. You can look at this, or I look at where the exposure warning, where the highlights start to get clipped. And a little clipping is okay, and you'll see why in a minute. So this is where the majority of our data lives. Okay. So now this is only true for this image. This is not true for the broad general use range of Tmax. This is only specific to the image. I have found with my testing that we want to broaden it up a little for Tmax, because this image was either overexposed or underexposed, whatever. So, but just to give you the idea for now, let's just move it back in where we had it. When you do this to create a style, you'll want to leave yourself some extra room. If you're doing this on a per image basis, then by all means just do this. Okay, now, enough tangents. So, this looks pretty good like it is, but remember that fall off I was talking about. So we want, when we're creating a style, we want to be able to have some wiggle room to shift things. Look how quickly it blows out when I just shift it a little. So also we want to have some room to tailor the input-output mapping, right? So so this clearly won't do because we've got the curve interpretation literally butted against the min and max points for the data. All right. So, but we can't deny this is the appropriate range for this photo. So how do we give ourselves the wiggle room while still maintaining this nice biased coverage range of this histogram? Okay, we do that by creating an S-curve. The S-curve is the trick to letting us get the 12 stops or so of dynamic range that Tmax provides us into the 8 stops or so that our screen provides us. So the S-curve works like this. This is the points that we like. This is the points that look good. Okay, so put a point in the middle. Now don't just go and point a point in the middle and put another point in the middle. We want to bias this. We want a longer fall off on the highlights, and we want a shorter fall off on the shadows. Why? Well, okay, the short version is that film tends to clip shadows faster anyway. So by giving yourself more of that fall off on shadows, you're just going to end up spreading out graininess. So there's no need to go so far. Instead, give yourself more room on the highlights, which tend to really compress on film and can be really decompressed with that long curve in Capture One. Okay, did that not make sense? Just go with it for now. Okay, so what we do is we place a data point. Does that get bigger when I... No? Okay. So pretty close on that end, and then kind of in the middle on this end. Okay, now, and we have the middle point as our anchor, because without the middle point, you'll see it goes and changes the midtones more than we want. So we have this middle point, and now you can see the midtones didn't change, but we do want to kind of bring this down just a hair so it doesn't fall off. Okay, and then same thing with this guy, and then that did change a little. That's okay, we can pull this down just a hair, something like that. So our midtones are relatively preserved the way we liked it with that. Like this area here resembles the linear interpretation of our linear curve when we had it just like this. But by adding that long fall off for the highlights and the short fall off on the shadows, we're better representing the way film works, so that when we decompress this data, it kind of works more naturally, yet we're still fitting it into, we're telling Capture One how to map this 12 stops of data from the film into our 8 stops of latitude on the screen. So that already looks pretty good, but watch what happens now. If you recall before, when we tried to shift this, it just all blew out really fast. Now we can shift a lot before we start to see those highlights. It's working a lot more naturally. Yay. All right, S-curves. You already knew about S-curves, but this is the foundation for why I've done what I've done. All right, now that we have all that, what else we can do is we can, you can just call that a day, and you can start shifting your exposure to taste, and that's fine. But note that shifting exposure moves the entire data on the histogram more uniformly. There's a little bit of a bias there, but it's more uniformly, right? And then actually brightness has a little even more of a bias, but let's not go into those details. I'm sure you guys already know how brightness exposure works, but we don't necessarily want to move the entire histogram over, because now we're, maybe we're getting the bright areas where we want them, but look what we're doing to the shadows. We're no longer keeping them in that zone of where we wanted the shadows. So rather than changing the exposure, we can come back to the exposure and change it a little, but first let's get a better tailoring to the image using the levels. Watch what happens. So I know I showed you, look, that moves the whole thing rather uniformly, right? Okay, when I move the levels instead, look how the black point does not move nearly as much as the highlights. So I'm going to move these to taste. Something like a little bit. We're going to have to whittle it down, because notice how it did move a little, right? Because this whole piece of data is getting shifted because of the bias that I'm creating here. But the bias, that shift, is a lot less. So we're straying away from what we want a lot less, which helps us to whittle it down better. So something like that is a good, I know it's a little bright, but something like that to start. And now we can bring those shadows back down to where we wanted. Something like this. And this is starting to give us a lot more contrast, because we're spreading the usable data, more accurately across the histogram. So we're spreading those highlights and shadows further apart. That's what gives us the contrast. Butting them next to each other, that's what makes it look all muddy. Okay, so a little bit bright. So now I can shift this a little for the midtones as I like. And something like that. I mean, this is a matter of taste now. The exposure is correct enough. This is now purely taste. So I'm not going to waste your time on my tastes. But that's the majority of it. That's how I got this curve. That's how I edit. And then once you realize you've been staring at it a little too long or whatever, I need to make some minor adjustments, you can now move the entire exposure to taste, and you have that little bit of latitude on quite a bit on the white side and a little bit on the black side. But yeah, you can adjust it. Okay, major thing to take away from this. This curve that I just created was tailored specifically to this image. If you want to create a style, you're going to need to broaden this up a little. So if you recall, when I created that linear version, which started here and went to here, that was the min and max for this image. You'll want to widen up the brights and widen up the darks a little, because you want the range of the curve to match the range of Tmax, not the range of your image, because your image may have been overexposed or underexposed. That's really important. So the way to do that, the way I did that, is I looked at a good number of photos that were underexposed, overexposed, different lighting conditions, and I looked at what's the pattern of their min and max, and then I adjusted the envelope to accommodate the min and max across the range of photos, and that kind of gave me the working range that Tmax operates in. And so that's the range that I saved on the curve for my general purpose curve. So when I'm editing a photo, I apply this style, which is a general purpose Tmax curve, and then I go and adjust my levels to taste from there. And by doing that, it helps provide a consistency and that Tmax look across my photos rather than editing each photo one by one, which literally, if you go on a per photo basis and do this, you will remove the look of the film. Because, you know, if you move the curve to the min and max and call it done, you're going to make every photo, whether it's Tri-X, T-Max, Ilford, you're going to make them all look the same. They're all going to look, I mean, they might you know, they might have a little more grain or less grain in how their shadows or highlights get stretched because the film had different biases, but the way if you just adjust it to taste, they're all going to end up coming out the same contrast, highlight, shadows to your taste and not the film. So, if you care about that, if you actually want to shoot different styles of film and take advantage of the styles of film, then shoot a couple rolls, different lighting conditions, find the min and max for the film, create your curve to the film, then save that, and when you scan that roll of film, use that style. And then on top of that, do a little bit of levels, a little bit of exposure. That will help you keep the style of the film, because when you have that style tuned for T-Max and you have that style tuned for Tri-X and you use that style for that film, it'll be consistent for that film and maintain a different look for, oh, here's all the T-Max shots, here's all the Tri-X shots, right? Or here's all the Ilford shots. Okay, I'm going on too long. You get the idea. Hopefully somebody learned something. I know I didn't, and yeah, that's how I develop black and white film. I will probably do another one of these videos with color, but I hope this was valuable. Have a good day, happy shooting, all that stuff.